Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA.
Ocala.
All right, thank you for tuning in. 12 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you. Nice looking Wednesday. Do have a storm out there. We will keep you updated on it. I'm sure you know, Chantal. Nothing happening here yet, but by Saturday and Sunday, look for some of this storm, and hopefully it's just going to be rain, because we do need the rain, so we're not going to complain about the rain. Do you know, if you are, our next guest has been with us before, and let me introduce him to you this way. If you are in an argument with somebody about whether there's intelligent design, whether there's a God, whether everything evolved from a single cell, and somehow that single cell somehow was the result of ammonia, or there's some kind of a theory that people have, and I don't know exactly where they get it from, because I don't remember that part in the Darwin studies, although I'm not a real Darwin expert in any way. But what about, maybe as adults, I guess we come to our own conclusions, and we have our own reasons for deciding to believe whatever it is we believe. But what about our children? I mean, one of the things that bothers me that I hear from the school, well, not from the schools, but from parents sometimes, is that the teachers have the evolution part of their science classes, and I guess evolution within a species, I guess, makes sense if you look at the Galapagos Islands, where they were isolated and those animals developed differently, or like there was this example of the squirrels on the north ridge of the Grand Canyon being different than the squirrels on the South Ridge because they had to. It was a little bit warmer on the South Ridge, apparently. So they developed differently than their cousins across the Great Divide there. The thing, though, that you always have to wonder about, I mean, it's easy for me. It's easy for me because I believe in God. It's easy for me to look at a plant or listen to a scientist talk about DNA. It's easy for me to say, God is a genius. Mm-hmm. Gosh is a genius. Well, no, God is a genius. Use the word as his name, right? Not as an image.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's hard for some people to do that. It's easy for them to say, Larry, I don't know why you think anything like you think. Why don't you just stick to the scientific facts here? But they always point to Darwin, and I was just reading that Darwin himself had some doubts, and that is what we're talking about here. Dr. Stephen C. Meyer has been with us before. You might remember. He had a book called Signature in the Cell, which was an awesome discussion and was over my head, but I loved it because he was speaking to people who are already over my head, who can out-talk me when it comes to evolution, and all I can do is to have the faith of a child, I think. Dr. Meyer has a new book. It's called Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life and the Case for Intelligent Design. Wait till you hear what's in this book. Dr. Meyer, is a Cambridge-trained philosopher of science. He's the director for the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute. He's a New York Times bestselling author already, and I'm guessing that his new book is also doing well. Darwin's Doubt is the title. Dr. Stephen C. Meyer, good morning, and thank you for coming back on the air with us.
It's great to be with you both.
Yeah, I'm glad there are guys like you out there. I don't know, you kind of support what I just kind of feel, and there's no real way for me to know anything,
Well, that's an interesting observation, because the whole Darwinian case has been based from the beginning on reversing the common intuition that most people have. In fact, most biologists have. Almost all biologists acknowledge that life looks as though it were designed. And the Darwinian idea is that appearance of design is essentially an illusion. Richard Dawkins, probably the world's foremost spokesman for the modern version of Darwin's theory, puts it this way. He says that that biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. But then he goes on to say that appearance is an illusion because, in the Darwinian view, an undirected, unguided mechanism, namely natural selection acting on random mutations, has produced that appearance, and that they would then say, the neo-Darwinists would say, that mechanism mimics the power of a designing intelligence without being guided or directed in any way. And that's where the theory of intelligent design comes in. The advocates of the theory of intelligent design argue that appearance of design is actually real, that the best explanation of that appearance is a real designing intelligence, and that you can tell that by looking closely at the science and by examining the evidence in light of what we know about cause and effect in the world around us.
I had an imaginary conversation with Dawkins. Is that his name?
Yes, Richard Dawkins.
Am I saying his name right? Okay.
Yeah, right.
Because I watched a couple of videos on him online, and I had an imaginary debate with him. And here's my side of the debate. My first thing was, why are you so adamant about people not believing that there's a God? And then he would come back at me with, why are you so adamant about proving to people there is a God? And I said, all right, well, I'll turn it around. You turn it around, I'll tell you my answer. Because it gives hope. I mean, anybody who says there's intelligent design means there's intelligent design for us too. And if there's intelligence behind my existence, then maybe there's hope beyond what looks like my existence.
There was a popular book a few years ago called A Purpose-Driven Life, and people were tapping into it. And one of the things I've said is you can't have a purpose-driven life if there isn't a purpose-driven universe. And so the importance of the issue, I think, is really palpable for people. It's an existential question. That doesn't make intelligent design right. It isn't true because it gives us hope or it gives a sense of purpose, but it does underscore the importance of the issue and why would we be talking about it. I've been on a lot of radio shows in the last 3 weeks since the book was released, and very oftentimes the hosts, and particularly of shows that are political, are just shocked at the way the board lights up with calls about this issue. But people really do care about it, and as much as tax policy or immigration or any other issue that's in the news today, so because it strikes at the heart of what it means to be human and whether we have any hope for the human condition.
Well, and it is both sides. Both sides will light up the phones.
Oh, absolutely. The night that my book became available for purchase on Amazon, there were hostile one-star reviews being posted by 3 o'clock in the morning before the book could have possibly been read.
Oh, wow.
So, there were people lying in wait to offer their negative opinion.
Really?
And with a great deal of intensity. So it's an intense issue on both sides because it is definitely a scientific issue, and the science is important and the foundation of what I'm arguing. But it certainly has larger implications for what you might call a person's worldview, and that's understandable as well, because every worldview or philosophy has to answer the question of what some philosophers call metaphysics, or in more layman's terms, just sometimes it's called the prime reality question.
Yeah.
What's the thing or the entity or the process from which everything else comes? And Darwinism gives one answer to that question. It says that we have life has arisen. All forms of life have arisen from an undirected material process, namely natural selection and random mutations. And the theory of intelligent design says the opposite, that there is a mind that has shaped matter to produce the exquisite life forms that we see around us. And those two answers, they're competing answers to the same question, and they both have larger implications for your worldview or personal philosophy, or they have larger, frankly, religious or anti-religious implications. So.
Yeah. Let me ask you to, in order to be fair to the book, so that the listeners know what's in the book. The book, by the way, is called Darwin's Doubt, if you're just tuning in, and our guest is the author of the book. He is Dr. Stephen C. Meyer. You've probably heard him on our airwaves before. And one of the things in the preparation material that I was sent in order to talk to you about the book was this. 530 million years ago, many animals suddenly appeared in the fossil record without apparent ancestors in earlier layers of rock. In Darwin's Doubt, Stephen C. Meyer tells the story of the mystery surrounding this explosion of animal life, and it's called the Cambrian explosion. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, and maybe I'll relate that to the title of the book as well, because what the book does is it examines this this one outstanding doubt that Darwin had that he expressed in The Origin of Species. He thought that he had pretty much explained the full range of clues and evidence, but there was this one niggling problem that troubled him, and it concerned an event called the Cambrian explosion. And the Cambrian explosion is the geologically sudden appearance of the first major groups of animals in the fossil record. In Darwin's time, they were absolutely the first. Now there have been a few that have been discovered just before the beginning of this Cambrian period. But the vast majority of all the animal forms appear first in the fossil record with no apparent ancestors in the earlier pre-Cambrian strata. And if you remember just basic geology, the sedimentary layers stack up with all things being equal, the oldest ones on the bottom and the younger ones on the top. And there's a seam of rock, a layer of rock, all the way around the world that documents the appearance of animal life. And all the way around the world, the various Cambrian locales, that those animals appear abruptly in the fossil record without any discernible connection to similar ancestral precursors in the lower sedimentary layers. And this was very surprising from Darwin's point of view, because he had depicted and expected that the history of life would look like a great branching tree. And it was also surprising because his mechanism of natural selection acting on random variations necessarily needed a lot of time. He thought that the variations upon which natural selection acted would be very small and minute, and thus the process of evolutionary change would be very gradual and would take great expanses of time. And yet what appeared to be the case in the fossil record was this abrupt or sudden appearance, quite the contrary to his expectation. And so he actually acknowledged that the Cambrian explosion was a valid objection to the views here entertained, as he put it in the Origin.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a doubt that troubled him.
Yeah.
He expected that later fossil finds would fill in the gaps, but in fact, in 150 years, the Precambrian record remains extremely sparse, and there have been more Cambrian forms discovered, more Cambrian animals, some of them exotic and strange, others that we recognize, like the first fishes are now recognized to have appeared in the Cambrian.
Right.
And all these new forms are still lacking these ancestral precursors, and so the explosion has become more explosive, not less.
Wow.
Wow. It's just amazing when we see some of these things. Now, I would imagine that Darwin's efforts were to figure it out. I mean, he probably had a real legitimate desire to figure it out. I think sometimes people use Darwin now to prove that there's no God. Was Darwin trying to prove there was no God?
No, he wasn't, although his science was leading him towards the materialistic worldview that I was describing. He wasn't an atheist, but near the end of his life he confessed to being in a hopeless muddle about metaphysics, by which he meant the God question. And he was he probably died an agnostic.
Okay.
His wife, who did believe in God, at one point wrote him a very poignant letter and said she feared that his science was depriving him of all human feeling and hope, and and Darwin was very moved by the letter. It was kind of and one of the things I do in the book is contrast Darwin's his rhetorical modesty, for one thing, and his willingness to express his doubts even in the Origin, with some of the modern defenders of what's called neo-Darwinism, the modern form of the theory that emphasizes mutations as the form of variations upon which natural selection acts. And because what I found in the technical peer-reviewed literature in biology was that, again, there are many leading evolutionary biologists expressing skepticism and doubt, especially about the creative power of this mutation and selection mechanism. One scientist put it succinctly. He said that the mechanism explains the survival, but not the arrival of the fittest. Sort of the point you were making earlier, Larry, about the small changes, the changes in the adaptation of the Galapagos finches to the changing weather patterns when they've gotten bigger or smaller or differently shaped beaks. That's one kind of question. Another question is, where do you get birds in the first place? Or where do you get animals in the first place? And that many evolutionary biologists are skeptical that mutation and selection can explain. And yet you have these folks that I call Darwin's public defenders, the public spokespeople for the theory, who will say extremely dogmatic things about it, as if all the important questions are sewn up. Dawkins being one of them. Unfortunately, he's a very well-spoken person, of course, but he says that if you find someone that says they are skeptical about evolution, then they're either stupid, ignorant, or insane. And then he adds parenthetically, or wicked, but he prefers not to think about that. So you have this disparity between the public's statements made on behalf of evolutionary theory, or the public statements about the status of the theory, and then the actual status of the theory as you find it in the peer-reviewed scientific literature, and as you find it going all the way back to Darwin. I mean, actually, I would say Darwin was very confident that he had the right theory. Today, I think what's happened is that niggling doubt about the Cambrian explosion has become illustrative of a major problem, which is the problem of the origin of biological form and structure generally. And that problem has grown up to be very big indeed, such that you now have evolutionary biologists calling for and working on new theories of evolution because they realize that the natural selection mutation mechanism just doesn't have the power that Darwin thought it did.
Dr. Stephen C. Meyer is our guest. Let's take a phone call. I've always thought that cars have evolved, but they are not making themselves.
Right. And what you're hitting on there is a really important distinction, because evolution can mean a number of different things. It can mean change over time, which no one doubts. And it can mean that the change over time has occurred as the result of an undirected, unguided process. So cars evolve, but they're evolving by intelligent design.
Exactly. All right, let's go to the phone. Good morning. Thank you for waiting. You're on the air with Dr. Meyer.
Hey, Dr. Meyer, I'm just a layman, and I respect what you're saying, and I continue to question much myself, your interpretations or others, and I happen to be a fan of Mark Twain, so that's just...
No, I think very good, yeah.
Thank you. But I would ask you, there does seem to be a natural order with life on Earth and the way things are all shaped and the consistencies, but my question to you, Doctor, is if life is found of some form on another planet, how do the religious interpretive people of anywhere, in other words, what does that do to your take on things, or other educated people's take on things? And I'll hang up and listen. Not saying that there is or it's not on a personal note. I'm just saying, what would that do to people's interpretation? I'll hang up.
That's a great question. First, I'd say one thing about that, just from a scientific view. There have been two important books about that. It's been widely assumed that life, that there's so many planets that it's inevitable that we would find life on another planet. But there's a book by two University of Washington scientists called The Rare Earth, and then another book called The Privileged Planet by astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez and philosopher Jay Richards. And both of them argue, in both books they argue that while there are lots of planets out there, it turns out that the conditions that would be necessary to make life possible are so extremely improbable that the number of planets pales in comparison to the difficulty of the task of finding a life-friendly planet. And in making that kind of assessment, they're not even addressing the question of how difficult it is to produce life, just how difficult it is to get a life that would be suitable for habitability if there was a plausible evolutionary explanation for how life arose. I'm convinced that the evidence, if you just look at the simple cell that we have on Earth, and what is necessary to build anything resembling what we call life, that if we found life on another planet, that it too would exhibit evidence of intelligent design. And therefore, I don't think there's there's no specific teaching in the Judeo-Christian heritage that says that God didn't create life elsewhere. So I don't think it would certainly not refute anything from a traditional theistic point of view. But the crucial, and man, we really haven't talked about why I think there's evidence for intelligent design. But the crucial evidence of design that I think we see in life is the presence of information, something that we know from experience minds produce, but matter acting on its own doesn't. And this was the huge discovery in the in the early 1950s, was the discovery that the DNA molecule that is providing instructions for building proteins and other heritable information is actually storing an instruction set, is something like a computer program that contains digital code.
It's amazing stuff.
And that we can talk about it more, but that's the key evidence, I think, or one key evidence that points to the need for an intelligent source for life.
Wow. Dr. Meyer, always fascinating to listen to you. Thank you for being on the air with us. Before we say goodbye, the book, again, is called Darwin's Doubt. I'm sure you can get it everywhere that books are sold. Do you have a website of your own, Doctor?
You bet. There's a website called darwinsdoubt.com, no apostrophe, and then also for the first book, Signature in the Cell, .com. So.
Okay. All right, and Robin has actually your website, Darwin's Doubt, as well as StephenCMeyer.org. and Discovery.org. So those three websites are already on the WOCA website. If you go to today's guest list, you'll see it. Dr. Stephen C. Meyer, thank you so much for being on the air with us, and come back.
Thank you for having me, and also for the thoughtful caller. That's great.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. We'll take a break and be right back.
This is Don with ABC Fredericks Appliance. Here's my daughter, Lena.
And hey, everybody, it's Lena. You need to come down to ABC Fredericks Appliance on County Road 25, just over the railroad tracks in Bellevue, where you are treated right with the right products, like Whirlpool, Maytag, Crosley, and Speed Queen. These are the new ones. Don't forget, we also carry used appliances that we warranty.